Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. It is time to take some of your questions, and our first one this week is from Martin on the Patreon, who brings up our discussion about the Irish-style presidency that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. And he asks, the Irish president has a council of state to whom he or she can refer issues to that must be done under certain circumstances, including before sending something to the Supreme Court. Given the mention of things like the Alberta Sovereignty Act, what are your thoughts on having an official council of state to advise the Governor General? To a certain extent, responsible government kind of takes that out of the picture. The Governor General and the King essentially must act on the advice of the elected government, and not doing so would cause a constitutional crisis. With respect to the Alberta Sovereignty Act, again, there's really almost no room for individual action on the part of the Lieutenant Governor in Alberta. They really have no discretion in this kind of a situation, because they are supposed to act on the advice of the elected legislature. And even if a bill is blatantly unconstitutional, they still should nevertheless give it royal assent, and the legislation will likely be referred directly to the Supreme Court of Canada, and that's likely what would happen in a situation with a possible Alberta Sovereignty Act. Unlike other countries as well who have constitutional courts, the Supreme Court of Canada has its reference function, which operates in much the same way. So instead of having a separate constitutional court to answer these kinds of questions, the Supreme Court of Canada has that reference function that can answer these kinds of questions. Is this bill constitutional? Is this, that kind of thing? And that kind of can happen pretty much automatically. I mean, the government would have to refer it to them, but that would happen with very little problem. And it would, so I don't know that there would necessarily need to be a, council of state kind of thing to advise a lieutenant governor, and why, or the governor general rather. And the reason why this is more of an issue with Ireland is because it is a directly elected president, so they have some more level of discretion than the Governor General or the King does under our system. So that's kind of where that differentiation lies. Our next question is from John Livesey on Twitter, who asks, can a province use the Notwithstanding clause and pass a law that nullifies the carbon price in their province? The answer to that one is no. The Notwithstanding clause doesn't apply writ large. The Notwithstanding clause only applies to sections 2, 7 through 14 and 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's all that it applies to. So section 2 being fundamental freedoms, sections 7 to 14 are legal rights, and section 15 are equality rights. And so what that essentially means is that when a province invokes the Notwithstanding clause, it basically means that they can suspend they can infringe on those particular rights for a period of 5 years before it would have to be reviewed by the legislature. And that is, it's certainly controversial. It's largely intended for situations where a court remedy is something that a government couldn't possibly do, or there's a particular case around school boards in Saskatchewan where it would basically be impossible for the provincial government to provide what the court was asking. So that's kind of what that clause is for. It's not a get out of jail free for anything in the Constitution. It's just strictly limited to those rights sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Our last question is from Aloyap, or Alloy Pep, also on Twitter, who says, do you think Pierre Poilievre actually believes his rhetoric, or is he just pandering to the Freedom faction in order to increase votes for Conservatives in order to become Prime Minister? That is a good question. I think there's some of it that he does believe around things like the crypto and the Bitcoin and stuff. He seems to have a genuine belief in that particular view of monetary policy, which I think is problematic. And whereas other stuff he certainly knows better. For example, like the EI premium that he's railing against right now. He was a former employment minister, so he knows that what he's saying is false with those talking points. The EI premiums need to go up in order to balance the EI account because it has been drawn down over the course of the pandemic recession. So the rates are going to rise until that EI account achieves balance again. At which point the rates can go down once again. And he knows this, but he is, deliberately saying otherwise in order to score points. So it's hard to say how much of it he or how much of it he actually believes and how much of it he knows is particularly false. This is kind of one of the things that I spend my days trying to at least point out. So it's kind of a tough call, but that's kind of where we're at. And that's why we need to really kind of beware about the things that are being said and making sure that we have a way of verifying what's true and what's not, so that people are better protected from some of the misinformation or disinformation that's being spoken about. And that's everything for this week. Thanks for all of your questions. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.